The next speaker that I would like to introduce to you is a Bulgarian. He comes from Germany because he lives there, but he has spent a lot of time in Bulgaria before going there. His name is Slavey Karadzov. He's a passionate programmer, open source supporter, and snowboarder since his early childhood. I'm also a snowboarder, and I know what a big pleasure it is to go up in the mountain after a hard day at work. So Slavey is the author of the book Learn Zend Framework 2, and he's working full-time as a senior consultant for Zend Technologies since 2008. He's also certified Zend Framework programmer, and he is part of the certification board. He's a MySQL engineer, and he has 2 master degrees. One of them was obtained in the Sofia University, and the other one in Stuttgart. So I'm sure he has a lot to share. And his talk today is about performance of Zend Framework 2 application. So give your applauses for Slavey.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So let's see if my slides will show up here. If not, I'll just talk. And yeah. I am also the founder of Linux BG, if some of you remember it once so long ago. But what we'll be talking about is improving the performance. And for that talk to be useful for you, you have to be first PHP programmer, preferably advanced. Beginner is also fine, but maybe you'll not understand everything. And then intermediate or advanced Zend Framework 2 programmer. So we'll be talking a lot with Zend Framework 2 terms. And what we'll do is see where we can improve. So in order to improve something, you need to know what this thing is giving it to you. So for Zend Framework 2, we have, let's say, quite powerful framework, quite flexible. It allows you to have things like you have an MVC system where you can divide the presentation because you don't want the designer to write in your source code and so on. We have also things like modules. So once you have the module, nowadays you can quite easily use it in another application. So you can merge modules in different applications. You can do quite interesting things. You have the event manager or the event-driven system, which means that it is possible in the different moments of your workflow to add additional actions in there without writing the source code, but just listening to a specific event and being able to intercept something. And at the end, we have service-oriented architecture, which allows us, if we have a module, to export some functionality and all the other modules to use it. So far, so good. But with complexity comes a price. So the price is that sometimes things can be slow because either you allow a lot of functionality to be there or you make it quite fast. And you probably, how many of you started programming in PHP and never knew about Java, or didn't program in Java? 1, 2. Did you start with writing all the source code in one file?
Of course.
You know that one file is really fast. So suddenly, Zend Framework says we'll have 300 files that will be loaded on one request. Yeah, no wonder why it's a bit slow. So I want to show you this slide. I will be showing this slide again. This is the event-driven architecture. And what it means is shown here just to remind you something. What we have in Zend Framework, we have a bootstrap event, and at that moment, all the modules have to be loaded, some things need to be generated, some configuration needs to be merged, and so on. Then we have the route event, which means from the URL that you enter in the parameters, we need to know where to go, to which module, to which controller, and to which action. Then we have the dispatch, which is the actual displaying of the information. Then we have the rendering, which from the data that you have tries to produce some nice presentation to the person, and then we send all that information to the user. For all of these events, we are able to do something before and after that. We're able also to skip. For example, even if a normal flow is usually you start here, then the next step is to do the routing, then to do the dispatching, and so on. Zen Framework allows you, if you come to the routing, directly to skip everything and to go to finish. And if you haven't tried this, I'll show you. It's relatively easy how this can be achieved. So, how to improve the performance? Again, it's absolutely easy. You just decrease the number of files that have to be interpreted. And here's the catch. So it means first, you have to decrease the number of files that needs to be loaded, plus you need somehow to speed up the tokenization of this file, the compilation intermediate bytecode, and the final runtime of the file. And we have some good things that can help us. So then when we talk about performance, mainly we mean we have to allow a bigger number requests per second to be executed on my server, the requests to take less milliseconds. And also, if we make optimizations, we should be making them in a way that if we add a second module, or if we add a second control and so on, this performance gain is still there. Which brings us to the moment that first we need to know when to make such optimizations. My recommendation is, once you write something and you're ready with the functionality, then if you see that there is a problem with the performance, then try to apply some recommendations. So we have two types of recommendations. Oh, I'll give you two types. One is the general recommendation, which you should apply. If you haven't applied them yet, you should apply them immediately. So if you have 5 servers serving your application, after these recommendations, you get to 2 or 1 even. Then we have a specific recommendations that are applicable not for all Zen Framework 2 cases, but specific ones, like you using a database, what I can do to improve the performance. And you're having a very complex routing, again, what can be done to improve the performance. So if you want to improve something, you need to know what is the initial state. And I have here one application. If I have the time, I'll present you also. I'll make a small demo and show you the results. So this is a Zen Framework application. I'm just making a very dumb benchmarking. I'm testing the first page. The first page doesn't have database requests or not anything substantial. And for this page, I need to know what is the initial state. I know, for example, the request per second. I need to know the time to load. I know the files to load. So a normal Zen Framework application with let's say two modules, maximum 3, which is the typical situation, you can end up quite nicely with such a number of files that need to be loaded. And on my machine, at least, I need this amount of time for a single page to show up. I'm making 2 different checks. The first is just to see per one request how much time it takes, and also I'm trying to run a couple of things simultaneously, because the performance, improving just that part may hinder usually another part in here. So initial state, 351 files. We have that number of requests per second. What we need to do. So we start with the general recommendations. That can be applied to any Zen Framework application. Actually, some of them can be applied to any PHP application or to any software. The first thing is, so I've been to, visited a lot of customers. All of them are smart, very smart. But sometimes they forget that they have a debug code. For example, in the log files, there is constantly debug information. And they have a slow system which is logging this. This can decrease the performance. If you have a debug code and you're running something on production, please try to disable or remove the debug code. If you're using Zen framework, what is usually happening or should happen if you're programming, you should have a debug module, which is taking care to log the additional information, to make some statistical gathering of statistics and so on. And when you go to production, this debug module should be disabled. If you want to debug something and so on, it's okay when you program to have var dump statements and so on. But once the source code is declared ready, this should be gone. And there should be no if in debug environment do this, otherwise do that. So once I disable my debug module, I get small improvements. So a human eye will not notice this. So it's just 10 milliseconds, and the number of requests increased just a bit. The files, nevertheless, decreased. So that's the first thing that you have to do. You all know this. As I said, all customers that I visited knew this perfectly, but I still discover this. So it probably is worth just spending 2 to 5 minutes to take a look at that. Now, the next thing, and that's really, so the next thing that can bring you quite good performance without almost zero cost is to always use opcache. Opcache is part of PHP since PHP 5.5, I guess. And there is no reason why if you don't use it. So using opcache improves the performance first of the PHP, the initial startup time of the PHP, and then it has also tricks to improve the runtime. What opcache is doing is the following. So as a PHP programmer, you know that you have a text file, and you don't compile this text file normally. This text file needs to be tokenized. So something needs to read, to put it into some blocks. These tokens needs to be, I'm explaining this quite simplified version, but from the tokenized version, you need to create intermediate bytecode, and then the intermediate bytecode needs to be executed. The part which is text file intermediate bytecode is the most time consuming from the initial startup time. Opcode cache is doing the following. It's just caching this intermediate bytecode, and then the next time when there is a request, it makes comparison with the local file, the date, comparison with what's in here. If the file hasn't changed, it uses the compiled intermediate bytecode. And then this brings you a very good improvement. Very good improvement. It's not making PHP run fast at that moment, but it makes it start much faster. The next thing is, once the opcode cache has also things that help you with, it makes optimizations. For example, it sees that you have some calculations, and you have a number, you increase it by 2, then increase it by 5, then increase it by something. At the end, it just says increase the number by all that stuff, like in C or other languages. So it brings you additional small improvement in the speed. And what you get at the end is you have a very, very fast PHP script. So the same application with the same number of files that you have here suddenly runs 5 or more times faster. Cost, 0. If you haven't used it by now, you should start doing it. So again, if you have 5 servers, you just decrease it to 1, the same performance. Okay, then what we were talking is that if we want to improve the performance, we just need to decrease the number of files to load. But yeah, how? We want to have the same result. And here comes another plugin or module for Zen Framework, which is existing since quite some time, this EDP Superluminal, which tries to pack the Zen Framework libraries that are used mostly in your application into one file. And it's, at the end, what you end up with that number of files. And you end up with a bit of improvement here and there. So we are really getting to speed. And in order to use this EDP Superluminal, you just need to say composer, require, and so on to my project. Then you need to run one you need to put a specific parameter in your URL, run it once, and here we go. We have the improvement. Not something that you usually do before you publish your source code to the production server, so before you make the release. We can do even more for packing some stuff. When Zen Framework, in the Bootstrap part of its workflow, it gets the configuration for the different modules. Then this configuration is merged with the configuration for the application, some additional overrides that you have. If you have 3 modules, that means that you have minimum 3 additional files, plus the time that it needs to merge that stuff. Zen Framework has already infrastructure that allows you to cache this merge configuration, and it can bring you some good results. So it increases the performance additionally. If you have more modules, so I've seen, the usual case that I've seen is between 3 and let's say 6 modules. The improvement is sort of exponentially in the performance. It's so the cost is editing one file, changing a couple of settings, and that's it. Hopefully, I'll be able to show this to you. So again, there is no reason why not to do this. You have to be careful, though, that you have to do this configuration caching once you're ready for your release. Because if you're developing, you're making changes, you're using the cache, you may get surprised because the cache is still used. There is no infrastructure in Zen Framework which is saying, let me check the files, did they change? If they change, I'll build another new config cache. So we are improving the performance up to here, very little effort. We need to start VI and change some lines, or start Zen Studio, and Zen Studio almost automatically will do this for us. Okay, now, other things that you can change and that can help you to improve the performance is a Zen Framework application